So I just realized that there were 3 videos I forgot to upload that a student just reminded me of when they tried to do these quizzes. So I apologize if you bought my book and have been waiting on these 3 videos. I thought that I counted 16 videos for 16 chapters and I thought I was done. But yeah, anyways, let's get started with the punctuation quizzes for this video. So if you're watching this for the ACT, then just remember, and also I guess for the SAT as well, these aren't going to be formatted exactly like the exams. The whole point of this book is that you learn the content first, like the actual skills, and then go practice with practice tests so you can get used to the actual wording of the questions, like the very specific way that they ask questions. You're just learning about the general rules in this book. So let's get started. For number 1, it says which these would not be grammatically correct. Now, one easy thing that I see right away that you can use as a trick on test day is here I see there's a semicolon, here I see there's a period. Those are the same thing and all the other words are the same. So you can't have the same thing both be correct. Also right here we have a comma fanboys. Comma fanboys is also equal to a period, which is equal to a semicolon. So that can't be correct either. So it has to be B. Now, the reasoning that this is not correct is because you need some sort of punctuation right here because you have 2 independent clauses that you're breaking up. So you have to break them up with either a semicolon, a period, or a comma fanboys. So now let's go to number 2. Which of the following choices is grammatically correct? So let's see. Okay, so just from looking at this, I can see that right like that that has a comma in front of it. So we one of the rules that you learned in the punctuation chapter was that you can't put a comma in front of that because it's part of an essential clause. So you cannot have this or this right here. So that I'm automatically gonna X these out. So then I'm just deciding between C and D. Now I see comma, comma, and I see an M dash and a comma. Now remember, you can have an M dash and a comma in the same sentence. It's just that you need to make sure that if the part in between is non-essential, that you have either a pair of M dashes or a pair of commas. You can't mix and match if the part in between this part is non-essential, like if we can cross it out. So let's check the part in between for each of these. So the part in between here, I'm going to cross it out and see if this still reads as a complete sentence. Some argue that this event marred Kennedy's presidency. That reads as a complete sentence, so that means we have to have either M dash or comma, comma around it, which we don't have here, so it can't be that one. But we do have comma, comma in D, so that's correct. And then for number 3, it says the sentence below is grammatically correct, but which of the following choices is also acceptable? So we're looking for something else that works. Remember, comma, comma, like we just talked about, if you can cross it out, you can have comma, comma in between because it reads as a sentence. Kennedy remains a divisive figure. Remember, comma, comma is the same thing as M dash, so automatically I know this has to be C. So for number 4, again, which one's grammatically correct? Again, right away on the test, when you see comma, comma, or M dash, you should automatically be checking those first because 9 times out of 10, that's going to help you get the right answer as quickly as possible. So we're going to cross this part out in between the commas and see if it forms a complete sentence. The Bay of Pigs still haunts U.S.-Cuban relations. Yes, that does read as a complete sentence, so we're going to circle that one. And again, the actual wording that we would use to say why that trick works is that this is a non-essential clause. We don't need the part in between. It's kind of like an interruption or extra set of information. And whenever we have that, we have to surround it with a pair of commas or a pair of M dashes, which none of the other answer choices do that. Now, for number 5, the correct answer is D because there's no need for extra punctuation to break up this thought. We don't have a dependent and independent clause that we're separating or the opposite, independent, dependent. We don't have independent and independent that need to be separated with a comma, semicolon, or comma fanboys. So with all of these, there's no reason to have a period can't go there, so that doesn't work. There's no reason to have a comma there. You're not breaking up. This is a dependent, if anything. Each of these could not be their own sentence, so there's no reason to put that punctuation in between. And then for this one, if we cross out this part, it doesn't form a complete sentence in between the commas. There has to be a non-essential clause there, which we don't have. So again, it's D. Okay, so again, I see comma, comma. I'm going to check that first. Cross that out. Does it form a complete sentence? The Bay of Pigs remains a topic of debate among historians. Yes, that is a complete sentence, and it works, so that one. Now, here, you can't put a comma, or you can't put a semicolon there because you can't put a period. Like, the Bay of Pigs is not a sentence. And then for the other one, the Bay of Pigs, despite its outcome, remains a topic of debate among historians. Again, this non-essential clause in both of these has to be surrounded by commas. You can't just leave a non-essential clause without the surrounding commas or surrounding em dashes or there could also be parentheses, but that's less common. So number 7 is an example of a series of 3 or more items separated by commas, and the correct answer would be B, because the 3 or more items, it doesn't have to be like an item, like a tangible thing that you can hold. It could be like an idea, like freedom, democracy, and prosperity. Those are the things that we're listing, the 3 or more items. So each of them has to be offset by a comma. Now, with the other ones, like you don't need a comma here because like bring's not part of that list. So it doesn't need to have a comma with it. And then some people would get confused by C because they'll say, colon, like we know that like a list comes after a colon, but that's only when when the part before is an independent clause. So like Kennedy hoped to bring, like that's not an independent clause. That can't be its own sentence. So it's not gonna work with like a list after, or like, what was the example that I used before? It was like something about a camping example, I remember. But if you go back in the chapter, you'll see examples of it having an independent clause before and then followed by a list. Or it could be something like Kennedy hoped to bring the following to Cuba, like that sort of thing. And then it could be freedom, democracy, and prosperity. So like in this context, if you wanted to put a colon, it would have to be something like Kennedy hoped to bring the following to Cuba, and then freedom, democracy, and prosperity would be after the colon. Okay, here again we have a non-essential clause in between the commas. So we have a non-essential phrase or clause, for many, that we can cross out and still read the rest as a complete sentence. The Bay of Pigs is a symbol of misguided foreign policy, so that would be the correct one. None of the other answer choices offset that non-essential clause the way it's supposed to, with the comma, comma, em dash, or parenthesis around it. And then for number 9, we're not going to be putting a comma in front of a preposition like in, so automatically A is out. The plan was executed in April 1961. That's good. The plan was executed. That can't be its own sentence. You can't put a period there, so you can't put a semicolon there. Same reasoning for this colon. Remember, what comes before has to be an independent clause, so it has to be B. So this one's a little bit tricky because there's like 2 reasonings for the commas in this particular question. So if we look at the correct answer, which should be C, it's having an introductory phrase during the crisis, like one of those introductory dependent phrases that comes at the beginning of a sentence that needs to be followed by a comma during the crisis. And then it's kind of like you look at this part as the sentence part, like its own sentence. Kennedy's actions unsurprisingly drew criticism, where like you could cross this out and you have an independent clause here still, because you could say Kennedy's actions drew criticism, and that's a complete sentence. You can cross out the unsurprisingly, which means it's a non-essential clause, and it has the 2 commas surrounding it. So that's the reasoning for where all the commas are placed. So for number 11, the correct answer is C, and the reason is that you have a comma fanboys right here. So remember, comma fanboys means that a period works there is the easiest way to think about it. So the president faced challenges domestically. That could be its own sentence. We could put a period there and get rid of this comma but. And then this whole other part could be its own sentence. His foreign policy decisions, such as the Bay of Pigs, proved even more contentious. And then the reasoning for the commas around such as the Bay of Pigs, that would be the non-essential clause thing, where we could cross out what's in between, and we would still have from here all the way to here being an independent clause, which easiest way to think about that is it could be its own sentence. You could say his foreign policy decisions proved even more contentious, and that's its own sentence. Okay, for number 12, the answer is C, and the reasoning for all the comma placements is where the comma right here, where it says the intense, unforgettable night. Remember, when you have adjectives, you separate them by a comma if the word and would work there. Like you could say the intense and unforgettable night, so a comma could go there. And then you don't need a comma for the rest of it because it's just like a regular independent clause. It doesn't need to be broken down. Like there's no independent, dependent, independent, independent, or dependent, independent clause. Like it's just one independent clause that flows together. That's its own complete sentence. Like the intense, unforgettable night of the invasion added to the challenges faced by the Cuban exiles. It's one complete thought. We don't need to break it up. Okay, for number 1, the correct answer is A. And again, you can't have a comma in front of a preposition like in. Also, it's having an, a non-essential clause in between the commas, comma, comma right here, so we could cross out the part in between, and it reads as a complete sentence. So that's the reasoning for that one. D is the correct answer for number 2 because it's one complete thought, one independent clause that doesn't need to be separated by any sort of punctuation. Remember, we use that punctuation to separate different clauses, typically, or like how we saw with the adjectives, like those specific examples. But most of the time it's going to be because we're separating different types of clauses, like independent, dependent, dependent, independent, or independent, independent, like 2 different independent clauses. This is just one. This is one independent clause, one complete sentence. No need to break it up with anything. And then for number 3, A is the correct answer. Again, super easy. Look at those commas around something and cross it out, see if it works. This historical event can be described as both tragic and preventable. So that's a non-essential clause that we could cross out, and it works that the rest forms a complete sentence. Okay, so now let's go to number 4. D is the correct answer because we have a non-essential clause, which is, this is the non-essential clause we could cross out, trained by the US. And this is the only option that surrounds it with one of the necessary forms of punctuation for non-essential clauses. So like whatever you can cross out needs to be surrounded by parentheses, or it needs to be surrounded by commas or em dashes, and this is the only one that does that. Now for number 5, it's similar reasoning. It's just with one transition word, however, right here. So we could still cross that out and have Kennedy did his best under challenging circumstances. Again, we have those em dashes that we see. Can we cross out the part in between? Yes, we can. The plan would have changed history. That could be its own complete sentence, meaning that the part in between has to be surrounded by em dashes, a pair of commas, or a pair of parentheses. So then let's look at number 7. So B is the correct answer to number 7 because we're separating 2 different clauses. So it says the location of the invasion was a swampy area known as the Bay of Pigs. So this is an independent clause. Or, I spelled independent. I meant to put independent clause, IC, independent clause. So this portion right here up to where it says pigs, that could be its own sentence. And then the portion after the comma, a place fraught with difficulties, is a dependent clause. So we have independent and dependent clause separated by a comma here. So A is the correct answer right here because again, we have those adjectives that could be separated by and. Like it's correct to say the underfunded and rushed mission suffered from poor planning. So that means that we need a comma there because and works between the adjectives. For number 9, this has 2 different comma rules. So we have the 3 or more items in a series right here where the Cuban crisis, the space race, and civil rights movements, that would be 3 or more items in a list that need to be separated by commas. And then the other comma rule that we're seeing here is a non-essential clause where everything from marked by like all of this is surrounded by these 2 commas. So technically it's a comma, comma all around that, even though there's commas in between. So that means comma, comma, we cross out everything in between and it reads as a complete sentence. It's right. So Kennedy's tenure remains a topic of study. That could be, that's a complete sentence or an independent clause. So it's A. So here we have, though a failed mission, that's a dependent clause. The Bay of Pigs is not the sole determinant of Kennedy's legacy. That's an independent clause separated by a comma. So that's the rule there. So number 1 on quiz 3 is something that a lot of students struggle with. Like they'll pick one of the other ones, particularly A or C, because they think that a comma always needs to go in front of a fanboy's word. That is not correct. We only put a comma in front of a fanboy's word when we could cross out that whole thing and put a period there, which you cannot do here. Like, you can't say the Bay of Pigs debacle was not only unexpected and tragic. You can't just put a period there because it's not a complete sentence. Same thing with like what's after. Also detrimental to Kennedy's reputation. That couldn't be its own sentence. A period doesn't work there. So automatically, like, it can't be A or C. And then, but you can just not put any punctuation in between, because it's not like we're separating different types of clauses or two independent clauses, as we just saw. So B would be the correct answer. The Bay of Pigs debacle was not only unexpected and tragic, but also detrimental to Kennedy's reputation. That's one complete thought that makes sense, that doesn't need to be separated by any sort of punctuation, because there's no two independent clauses that are happening. There's no an independent, dependent, dependent, independent. So we don't need a comma. And then for number 2, again, remember, if you see a comma in front of that, like, no, we don't do that. And then, so now you're choosing between A and C. Now, C, where it says the plan that was supposed to be foolproof ended in a catastrophe. The plan that was supposed to be foolproof, that couldn't be its own sentence, alongside with like the ended in a catastrophe. I cannot speak. Ended in a catastrophe could also not be its own sentence. So we don't need to have like a comma. Wait, actually, hold on. The plan that was supposed to be foolproof. Yeah, that's not a complete thought or complete sentence. So you wouldn't need to separate those, because we don't have two independent clauses. We don't have a dependent independent, and we don't have an independent dependent, anything like that. So it's just one complete thought that doesn't need to be broken up by punctuation. So it would be A. So number 3 is testing the non-essential clause thing again, where this would be your non-essential clause that you could cross out and still have a complete sentence. The soldiers entered the battlefield and faced dire consequences. That's a complete sentence. So remember, when you can do that, when you can cross it out, what's crossed out needs to be surrounded by either a pair of parentheses, a pair of commas, or a pair of em dashes. Now, B is making sure that you know that it has to be like one of those choices. You can't mix and match, and you can't like double up on things. You have to pick one of those options, which is why the only correct answer would be A. So then let's go to number 4. So it says C is the correct answer. The situation itself made the Cuban exiles question their decision. It's one complete thought that doesn't need to be broken up by like, it's one independent clause, one complete thought that doesn't need to be broken up by a comma. Again, for A, we have that non-essential clause thing where we could cross out the part in between the commas and have a complete sentence. Kennedy admitted to the mistakes by the administration. I think I just found a typo. I think I meant to say mistakes made by the administration. So I'll change that in the new version. And then B is also making sure that you don't make that same mistake. Or number 6 is also making sure that you're not making that same mistake about you don't always need a comma in front of fanboys. Remember, it's only when it's two independent clauses. So like, this part extends to his advisors as well. That's a dependent clause. And the blame for the failed operation doesn't rest solely on Kennedy. That could be its own sentence. That's an independent clause. But then in order for us to have a comma fanboys right there, it would mean that this part has to be an independent clause, extends to his advisors as well, which we don't have. So it's just one complete thought, if we're thinking about it as a whole right here. So we don't have like independent clause. It's just one whole independent clause altogether is how we're thinking about it. So there doesn't need to be a comma fanboys breaking it up. So you would say the blame for the failed operation doesn't rest solely on Kennedy, but extends to his advisors as well. Okay, so for number 1, we have that the toy belongs to one cat. Remember, what singular or plural that matters with apostrophes is going to be like the thing that does the owning or shows ownership, which is the cat. So it's one cat, so it's singular. So that means that we have to put an apostrophe S after the word cat. So then that would just be A. Now for sister's room, like my older sister share a room, my sister's room is next to mine. It's talking about my older sister, so there's more than one sister, so it's plural. So when it's plural, like sisters with an S is already plural, so that means that we just need to add an apostrophe after to show that they own the room. Now, you also have some contractions with apostrophes. For instance, this means you are when there's an apostrophe right there. So if you can say you are, then this form of your is what works. You are sure that's the right way to go? Yes, so that's the correct answer. Same thing kind of with number 4 with A, they are. If they are works, then that means that it's this there. So they are going to their friend's house over there. That works. So it's that one right there. Also, this is the correct form of there with like over there at a place, like you're referring to over there. This is also the there that's kind of like everything goes with it as long as the other two theirs don't work. So like they are works with this one. They are would not work here. Like you can't say over they are. So that one doesn't work. And then THEIR, that there, it works here because you're saying it's their friend's house, like it's the house that belongs to the friend. So that's why you use the I version. But you couldn't say over there, like there's nothing following it that it's showing ownership of. So there's no reason to use the I one. So then it's just like kind of like the leftover one is also how you could think about it. Okay, for punctuation quiz 4, just for like logistical reasons, I just corrected it and I'm gonna explain the corrections up here instead of going through the actual like A, B, C, D, because it's kind of like hard to go back to the passage and like do that on video at the same time. So with number 1, you would correct it by putting M dashes around the non-essential clause right here. The non-essential clause is this portion, the second president of the United States. You could cross that out and still have a complete sentence for the rest of it. Like John Adams was more than just a political figurehead in the annals of American history. So you could cross out the part in between, so then you could put M dashes or commas around it if that was an option, but the option that they gave you was that I gave you, whoops, was M dashes. So we would put M dashes around that. So then for number 2, we're trying to show possession, and this is one that like gets students a lot. So John Adams, that's his name, like John Adams. It just happens to end in an S. So it's still a singular person that we're talking about. So Adams is singular already, even if it ends in S. So we're just going to add an apostrophe S to it to show possession because it's his role. Now, over here, there were no commas initially around the non-essential clause when there should be. So like if we cross out this portion, we could still have a complete sentence with the rest. This Harvard-educated lawyer was also not immune to controversies. So we need to have it's surrounded by either commas, M dashes, or parentheses, and the option they gave you was, or that I gave you was commas. And then, so for number 4, critics, or let me read the whole thing. His signing of the Alien and Sedition Acts, which allowed the federal government to deport foreigners and to charge critics of the government with treason, remains a contentious part of his presidential legacy. So the options that they gave you were, why do I keep saying they? Like, I wrote it. So critics of the governments, like it had like an extra S or apostrophe S. There's just one government that we're talking about, like the federal government is what we're talking about. So it doesn't need to have like an S to be plural. And it's not showing possession of anything that follows. Like we're not saying the government's critics, we're just saying critics of the government. So we don't need to have an apostrophe S or anything after. It's just critics of the government. And then for number 6, his wife's letters, I think there was something there. Hold on. Yeah, there was a comma there. We would get rid of it because there's no reason to have a comma there. It's not like we have an introductory, like dependent clause right there. It's just a one whole independent clause, one complete thought that flows. His wife's letters are testaments to their strong bond and mutual respect, so we don't need that comma breaking up because we don't have we don't need it to break up different clauses or 2 independent clauses with a comma fan voice. So let's keep going. And then for this next part, again, I did the same thing. So number 7, they often exchange thoughts on governance, societal issues, and personal matters. So this is a list of 3 or more items where governance, societal issues, and personal matters, those are the 3 items in the list that need to be offset by commas. Now, for number 8, it was just that we had to add a comma there, I believe. Yeah, that was it. And that's because we have we need to have the non-essential clause that we can cross out this portion right here, surrounded by commas. So John Adams shaped America's formative years, leading a young nation through its early challenges and laying the groundwork for its future. So we have like a double whammy for this one. We're on quiz number 5. Yeah, quiz number 5. So for number 1, there's 2 rules that are happening here simultaneously. So we have, remember, John Adams is just one person. So if we're talking about him owning his presidency, like it belongs to him, it's his presidency. We need to have, since it's singular, just add an apostrophe S to the end. So it could only be like A and D from that point on, because the other ones don't do that. And then the reason that that the colon works here rather than like the comma, that's the difference over there, is because we have John Adams' presidency was about more than just politics. That's its own independent clause, followed by a colon that kind of like explains or clarifies what we're talking about before. It expands on it, like it was about shaping a nation. So that's the rule with the colon right there as well. Again, same thing with the Adamses. Like Adams, it's weird to say, but that's the whole point I put it there, because they like to do stuff like that where it's weird to say and you can't go off of your ear. Adams's involvement, like it's his involvement, it belongs to him. So it needs to have, since there's just one guy named John Adams, you need to add an apostrophe S at the end, so it can't be C or D. And then we're choosing between A and B. Now you see comma, comma here, which means that we would have to cross out the portion in between, and it still reads as a complete sentence, but this one's kind of tricky. I'll show you why it doesn't work. So Adams's involvement is well documented in history. While that can read as a complete sentence, the part here is essential to the meaning of the sentence. So like, even though it still reads as a complete sentence, this is like why I say like 9 times out of 10 you could just cross it out and then like it like check, and like it checks out. But there's that one time where like it won't always work. So this is an example of that. Like, it's not just his involvement in general, it's like specifically in the sentence we're talking about his involvement in America's independence is well documented in history. That's all part of like what we're talking about being well documented in history. So it contributes to the meaning, so to like the complete meaning of the sentence. That's kind of like how I like to think about it. Some people like to remember that like most of the time we don't put commas before like words like in and stuff like that, but that also has like exceptions. So like I feel like this is the better way to think about it. Okay, this one also has 2 different rules. So we have the non-essential clause, like just that extra information right there that we could cross out. Abigail Adams, John's wife, was known for her letters sharing her insight on 4 major issues. And then the colon followed by a list. So like all of this, Abigail Adams was known for her letters sharing her insight on 4 major issues, is an independent clause, followed by a colon and then a list. So that works out. Then we have the men's opinion. So men is one of those like irregular plural ones where it doesn't end in an S already. So like this is already plural, the men, and then we just add an apostrophe S to it. The men's opinions during Adams's, remember it's Adams's because there's one Adams, even if it ends in S, we add an apostrophe S. Time were often documented, so that's the reasoning for number 4. And then for B, whose efforts were monumental, is the non-essential clause that we could cross out and still have a sentence that is a complete thought. The nation's founding fathers included John Adams. And then it's also testing whose versus who is. So like when it has apostrophe S like this, that's who is. So like these are who is. You can't say who is efforts were monumental, so that's why those don't work. It's just whose. So then for the next one, it's testing again with the Adamses. So it has to be either that one or that one, where it's just one Adam. Like it's one guy named John Adams that happens to have a name that ends in an S. So it's still singular, so we still add apostrophe S because it's his son. That's the son belongs to John Adams, a singular person. And then we have the difference between these is that this one has M dash all around it, and this one has comma M dash. So remember, comma M dash can exist in a sentence, but it cannot be existing in the context of a non-essential clause, if that makes sense. So like if the part in between the two forms of punctuation is non-essential, it has to have a matching pair of punctuation that's either M dash, comma, or parenthesis, which this does. We could cross this out and still have a complete sentence. John Adams' son also served as a U.S. president. So then for this one, first we're looking at the it's part. So remember the one that looks like this with the apostrophe before the S, that's it is. So it is well known is the correct way to say this. So it can't be B or C. It is well known that John Adams was an influential figure in America's early days. Again, remember, we wouldn't have any reason to put a comma there in front of the word in. So it's just one complete thought that that doesn't need to be separated by any sort of punctuation. So it would be A. So then now let's go to number 8. So number 8 is B, and that's because we have the non-essential clause right here that has to be surrounded by comma, M dash, or parenthesis. So that's the reasoning for that one. And my phone is about to run out of battery, so we're going to try to finish this quiz really quick, and then I'm probably going to do a continuation. I'm definitely going to do a continuation video after this, so this is going to be like broken up into another video. And then number 9, so it's his legacy is still evident in today's political landscape. So first, like, look at the answer choices to see what's different is like usually how you go about these. So like today's, all of these are different. So it's today's like political landscape. The political landscape is of today or belonging to today. So you have to put today is singular, so it's just apostrophe S after. So that's why it's B. And then for number 10, Dr. Thompson is a cardiologist who is exceptionally bright and talented. Who is the correct way to say that, not like the only versions of whose are like these two right here. So like this one doesn't even exist. So you would be picking between those, and it's the who is version, who is exceptionally. So you would use that. And then that's, you would have to use apostrophe that is if you wanted to do that. Okay, and let's go to number 11. So John Adams, the second president, was aware of the challenges he was to face. Again, we have that non-essential clause that we could cross out and put either M dash, comma, or parenthesis. And then number 12, John Adams was an extraordinary leader. His presidency is a testament to his dedication, passion, and vision for a new nation. We have independent clause, 2 independent clauses separated by a period, so that's good. And then we have a list of 3 or more items or ideas that are separated by commas, so that's why D is correct. Okay, and I'll be putting out the other video soon. I just have to record it because I recorded these a while ago, and like it was in November when I released these, and I can't remember where I saved them onto, and I cannot find them, so I have to re-record the stuff that I haven't uploaded yet.